Okay, so once again, I apologize for my voice. I am quite optimistic that by next week I'll be back to normal and this won't be a problem anymore, but I'm still battling what I was battling on Monday night, though I think it might be slightly better than Monday night because it was pretty bad then. So anyway, fingers crossed that it's better. You got two handouts today. The first one is for Assignment 101, which is your first assignment in this class. I elected to have it due a week from today, so it'll be due on Wednesday, which is before your President's Weekend holiday. And somehow it just seemed mean to have something due when you got back from President's Weekend, so I just made it due before so that you could not worry about it over President's Weekend. That was my goal. I'll try to do the same thing when it gets closer to spring break and make sure that something isn't scheduled right after spring break so you don't have to worry about it. Okay, so for Assignment 101, you're going to be selecting your best photograph. It needs to have been taken from the start date of this semester forward. So you can't use something that you shot over winter break. You can't use something from last summer. It's a way of kind of leveling the playing field. Everybody has fairly reasonable access to everything that's around here in California. So it's kind of a fair way of looking at it. So it has to be a relatively recent photo. The idea is that you will use the post-processing techniques that we discussed today and on Monday night to make your image better than it is by default. You'll be graded on your image and how it turns out and the composition and the rest of it beyond just that you use the techniques that I talked about. So if you're an extraordinarily great photographer and your image turned out such that you don't need to do any post-processing, congratulations. You don't have to. But most of us, including myself, would need to do some post-processing. And we're going to talk about those strategies both today and in class on Monday. The stuff today is the more standard stuff. The stuff that we'll talk about on Monday will deal with blending modes, a little more advanced, not necessary for what you're creating, but it may help depending on your individual image. You're going to do two things. One, you're going to make a post prior to the start of class on next Wednesday, a week from today, the 10th. When I start class is when it's marked late. So you have to make sure that it's done prior to that. You'll post your original image and you'll post your post-processed image, so your corrected image, and you'll write a little paragraph that explains what you did in the post-processing. Okay? So you turn all of that in prior to the start of class. I will also ask from you that you print a hard copy, a physical copy. It doesn't have to be special photo paper or anything else. You just have to print it from the color printer here. I think it costs 25 cents, very reasonable. The color printer is the C5550. That's what you're going to send your document to. For this assignment, I'm not overly concerned that I get the paper copy prior to the start of class. I just want to make sure I get it on Wednesday at some point. Okay? So if you're having trouble getting it to print and you can't find me or whatever before class, we'll find a way to get it printed for you. Okay? But the post has to have happened. That's critical. All right? It's just printed on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. Nothing particularly fancy. Okay? I think that about covers it. If you guys have questions, let me know and we'll talk about it specifically. Okay? So I also already passed out exercise 104. Today we're going to spend a long time, not as much with me talking and a lot more with me demonstrating to try to show you what these various techniques do and how they work. So we'll spend a lot of time actually going through these steps and I'll show you live what happens and how they work. So I went ahead and I passed that out for you. So we'll start with kind of the basic lecture as is the normal for the format, and I'll walk through some of it, though some of the steps or some of the techniques that I'll talk about are very difficult to explain in a verbal manner, but when we actually do it live, it'll make a lot more sense. So some stuff will kind of defer on the explanation till we get a little bit further along. So we're going to start talking about processing your photographs and developing some kind of a digital workflow. And my guess is that almost all of you already have some kind of a workflow. It could be as simple as I take the picture with my phone, right? I crop it in Instagram, and maybe I apply a filter to it, and then I post it to Instagram, right? That constitutes a workflow, right? It's a set of steps that you generally go through as a result of shooting a photo. It could be more extensive. It could involve more steps, certainly. It could involve much more post-processing than that. What you're going to be working on in this class involves a little bit more. Certainly it will involve bringing your image into Photoshop and doing some stuff within Photoshop as well. Your workflow is going to vary based on who you are as a photographer and what steps you typically need to do. So for me personally, I almost always have to do a levels adjustment to my photos. Just kind of one of those standard things that I need to do. You might shoot such that you almost never need to do a levels adjustment. It's going to vary by who you are and the types of photos you shoot and what equipment you have. And so you have to kind of learn what's appropriate for you. So if we talk about the key components of a workflow, the workflow generally begins by going out and capturing the images. Right? It doesn't make sense to have a digital workflow if you don't actually have an image to work with. So we're going to go out into the field, we're going to capture the images. Then we're going to take those images and we're going to put them into some kind of photo management application, or maybe we're just going to download them and put them on a particular folder in our computer, or something that gets them off the camera into the computer. Right? The hope is that we use some kind of a organization strategy for these particular photos. But again, that's a personal choice. Right? The next thing is you're going to do post-processing of those images. So it might be correcting the levels. It might be adjusting with curves. It may be retouching the photo. Right? Maybe there's some blemishes in the photo that you want to get rid of. Maybe it's going to be making an image from color into black and white. Right? It's really going to vary based on what the final output is going to be. After that, you're going to move into the output stage, which would be, what are you ultimately going to be doing with this photo? Now, for most of us right now, it's very rare that we go print the photo and keep a print copy of our photo somewhere. Chances are we're going to put it on Facebook or we're going to put it on Instagram. Right? Maybe if we're more interested in one of the other album photo sharing sites like Flickr, maybe we'll put it on Flickr. Okay? Once we get beyond that, those are kind of the main ones. Maybe you'll put it on Google's Google Plus, for example. But for the most part, you're going to put it somewhere digitally, and it's going to live there. So my guess is that you pretty much already have one, at least in the simple stages. We're going to try to extend that a little bit because we're going to add in Photoshop to your workflow. Now, is it realistic to think that we're going to be able to post-process every single one of your images in Photoshop? No. It's going to take way too long to do that. But when you have that one image that you really want to turn out well, that's where Photoshop comes in. And that's where you're going to do your post-processing. Okay? You could theoretically automate some of the steps. If you know you generally have to do a levels adjustment, you can almost automate that entirely, right? And then thinking about how your photos are used. So when you think about what software you're going to use, obviously I've hit on Photoshop several times in this class. This class is about Photoshop. We're going to learn Photoshop. But there are other options out there that maybe are slightly better for managing photos than Photoshop. Photoshop is a purely raw photo editing tool. It doesn't do the management of the photos. So we'll talk about programs that do the management. Okay? You have to think about, is it going to be on your personal computer? Right? Some of you bring in your laptops now, so you have the ability to have something already on your computer that you can use. Right? Maybe it's on the lab computer. What are you stuck with? Well, pretty much we have Photoshop, and that's what it's going to be. You also want to think about, is the software program that you're using a destructive editor or a non-destructive editor? And by non-destructive editor, it means that it's a piece of software that applies the edits that you make as layers or as something that you can turn on and turn off independently. Right? It's not something where you have to undo, undo, undo. It's just, no, I don't really want to have the levels adjustment. Let me uncheck the box and it turns it off. Or let me hide the layer. Right? So that's non-destructive editing. You always have your original. Destructive would be I make a change and that change becomes a permanent part of the image. And I would have to undo to get rid of that change. Or I'd have to go back maybe to my original image and start all over again. Okay? So we're interested primarily in non-destructive editing if we can afford it, or if it works into our workflow. There's free options that are generally great for, we'll say 0 to 10,000 images in that ballpark. When you get above 10,000 images, you're kind of be thinking about professional options at that point. And there's really only one player in the game now, which is another product that's written by Adobe. It's called Lightroom. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. For me personally, I have about 60,000 images, and it's a lot to keep track of and manage. And I'm struggling a little bit because the software program I was using went out of business. Anyway, so let's talk about the free options. The first one is written by Google. It's called Picasa. Anybody heard of this before? Maybe a little bit. It's pretty decent at managing photos and keeping track of what's going on. It is not as sophisticated as some of the other options out there, but it's a pretty good, basic, free tool. It does do some basic editing. It has some backup tools that are built into it. We can organize by albums or any of the other typical ways of organizing photos. And because it's a Google product, it's really easy to publish to Google+. Right? So if you're in the Google ecosystem, not a bad choice. Right? And it is Windows or Mac, which is, I guess, nice, though Mac might have a different option to begin with. Okay? It is non-destructive editing, which is exactly what we were after, but it's not really that advanced in terms of what it can do. Photoshop Express used to be an online-only application. They've moved the whole app onto tablets or phones primarily now. So it's not an online application anymore. It has a lot of kind of basic fixes. Is it the full-fledged Photoshop? No, not at all. Right? It tends to be a destructive editor, so you're going to destroy the image that you upload into it. Now, typically, you're going to copy the image off of your camera reel and put it into the application before you mess with it, so you can go back and get the original image, but it's much harder to just turn something on or turn something off as you're going forward. Okay? It does have a few advanced editing features, but it's nowhere near Photoshop itself. Okay? So there's another player in this game. It's called Pixlr.com, and they've actually made some pretty big strides in the last year or so. And if we look at this, it's almost identical to what Photoshop looks like. Okay, it's very, very close, and it's online. You log into the website, you access their editor, and you can do almost everything that Photoshop does. The big difference is that they don't have adjustment layers, which is the big thing that Photoshop does that this doesn't. And the adjustment layers allow it to be non-destructive. And so in this case, it is a destructive editor. What you do is kind of permanently done to the image. So that's the downside, but the upside is it's completely free to use. So you have something that's almost as good as Photoshop. You can do almost everything that Photoshop can completely for free, right? Which is certainly a good way of going. Okay? So if you have Mac or you live in the iOS ecosystem / OS X ecosystem, we have an application called Photos that comes built in onto all the Macs. Apple used to have two separate products. They had iPhoto and they had Aperture. Aperture was for the professional users. iPhoto was for the consumer. Okay? Apple decided that they didn't want to do that anymore. They have one application now that's Photos. Those of us that were in the Aperture ecosystem are very distraught over this because we got a lot of options taken away from us, which is unfortunate. That's why I'm kind of struggling with what I use. The truth is, though, when they built the new Photos application, they included all of the professional stuff. They're just hidden. And so you can get into a lot of the professional options. It does give you very advanced editing features such that you might not even have to open Photoshop, but you can get most of everything done that you could do in Photoshop done in this application by itself. So it certainly gives you a lot of options. The problem is it's Mac only, so you're not going to get it for Windows. But if you have a Mac, great. You should use it and try it out. Right? It does contain extensive metadata support, which we'll talk about that in a little bit later. And it does contain stuff like facial recognition, so you can see all the pictures of your brother or whatever, and they'll just populate. Okay? There are professional options. There used to be more professional options than there are now. The professional options are basically written by Adobe. Adobe is the company that makes Photoshop. They make another product called Lightroom, which is their equivalent of a photo management application. It contains almost everything that Photoshop has for doing post-processing. Okay? Photoshop can do a lot more stuff that Aperture can't, but in the world of managing your photos and doing simple retouches like levels and whatever, Lightroom is very, very good at it. The downside would be it's expensive, and you're also, it's Windows or Mac, which is good. It's non-destructive editing of the images, so if you make an edit, you want to turn that edit off, it's not a problem. You can get the advanced editing features, and it has basically the same types of organization from facial recognition to folders, etc. Okay? And then we get to the last one, which is Photoshop. And this is certainly what we're going to be using in this class quite extensively. Photoshop is not a photo management application. It's a photo editing application. So you're going to be managing it somewhere else and then opening the photo, editing it, and then closing the photo. So it's kind of a different animal, so to speak. It is also expensive, though you can get a rental license. It used to be more expensive for the one-time purchase. Now you can kind of rent it on a month basis, and depending on your definition of expensive, it may or may not be expensive. It does have the most advanced editing features, including a pixel by pixel correction capability. So if we were to blow up an image, and I'll show you this live later on in the lecture, but if we were to blow up an image at a certain level, we would see a bunch of little squares that had colors in them. Right? Those are pixels that make up our image. And I could go through and manually edit any one of those individual pixels into something else. So it's completely flexible in what we can do. But that comes at a cost because we don't have any management associated with it. So you have to deal with the management on a separate thing. So no file organization, no albums or anything like that. So let's talk a little bit about organizing your images and how you might want to organize your images. So every photo that you take contains a bunch of extra information that you can't see. So that file contains a bunch of information. It's kind of like in the old days, and maybe you had like an aunt, and all of you are too young to actually have done this yourself, but maybe you have like an aunt who's older than you who used to take pictures, and she used to turn on the little date stamp in the corner of the pictures, or you saw this like your parents did this or something. It was like orange, and it would say like, 1998, and 0105 or something, for the date, and it would show up in the pictures. Well, this is the digital equivalent of that, although it gives us a little bit more information. So this is a little snapshot of a particular photo. If we look at the date here, I shot it on 8/21 of 2008. So it's an older shot, but it gives me a bunch of information about what I did. So it was shot with my Nikon D80. It tells me that I had the 18 to 135 millimeter lens attached to my Nikon. It tells me that my zoom level was at 62 millimeters. It tells me that my ISO, remember this from last time, the sensitivity of the sensor was set at 125, right? My exposure value was set to 0. My aperture, f-stop, was 5.6, right? And my shutter speed was 1/500th of a second. So it gives me all that information about what my camera settings were. So it saved that, which is great. And then it gives me stuff like my name, the version name, how big the image was, how large it was, where it's stored, etc. We can extend that by putting in keywords and extra information. Now, if we were to shoot with our phones, right? My Nikon D80 doesn't have this capability for obvious reasons, but if we were shooting with our phones, they have a GPS chip that tracks the phone's location. Well, assuming that you allowed the camera to have access to the GPS location, it will automatically stamp in where you took the photo. So not only do you have this information, but you have the GPS location of exactly where you took the photo. Right? And depending on the accuracy, it's usually within 10 feet or so. So it's fairly accurate, which is definitely good. Okay? When we get into the organizational strategies here, these are kind of universal across most of the organizational softwares that we might choose to use. And we'll go through them in a little bit more specifics here. So folders are the most basic form of organization. You don't actually even need a management application to organize by photos or by folders. You just create a folder and you put pictures of a certain thing into that folder. Right? So it's not that sophisticated. Albums are kind of a little bit more, slightly more complex than folders, but very similar to that in that you name, this is a particular album, all these photos go into that album. They could be a smart album where you say, show me all of the photos that I shot with an aperture of f1.8 or something like that. Right? So they could be a little bit more intelligent, but they allow you to kind of organize your photos. Events is this great thing that, if I'm not mistaken, Apple actually came up with, and everybody has since borrowed from them. The concept is that when you go out and shoot pictures, chances are you go and you shoot a group of pictures together, and then you don't take pictures for a while. Right? So you go to a birthday party, you shoot 100 pictures, and then you don't take pictures the rest of the day. Okay? And then maybe the next day you go to the beach and you take pictures at the beach. Well, computers are smart enough to know that these groups of photos tend to be events, and so they'll automatically group like photos together. And you'll see this if you're on your phone and you look at how it groups photos. A lot of times it'll group it this way. Okay? So it's just intelligent groupings of photos. Faces, with software and hardware, we can now recognize most faces that are available. So as you take pictures, assuming you tell the software who somebody is in one photo, it can go through the rest of your photos and say, I think it's this person. The consumer grade of facial recognition is not nearly as good as government grade facial recognition. the truth is that facial recognition is very, very easy for computers to do. And so it's nice that we're seeing a little bit of it, but it's not quite as sophisticated as it probably should be. I mean, there's probably a point in time in the not too distant future where there'd be enough facial recognition to where you could be looking at somebody and you could have a computer tell you who it was and all the information about them, right? So it's not far away. It's actually kind of creepy if you think about it. But it's in these software packages and can help you organize. Show me all the photos of John. It gives me all your photos. Okay? Places, geographic locations of images, group all the photos that I shot in Rome together. Right? All the photos that I shot at DVC together. Right? Regardless of the time that I shot them. Another good way of organizing. So let's move from organizational strategies, which is not something we're going to do too extensively in this class, into post-processing of imaging. And I'll go through a lot of the typical adjustments that are done to photos, and then when we go to the live examples, I'll show you how to do these adjustments. Okay? So when we get to typical adjustments, we'll start first with the crop and resize of an image. Okay? This is basically, after you shot the image, adjusting the composition. Okay? The more of the photo that you crop off, the smaller the photo becomes. Right? It's no surprise. You take one size of image, you cut off pieces of it, the image becomes smaller. Okay? You can't crop larger, if that makes sense. You can't start with an image and add to it. You can't make it higher resolution. It doesn't work that way. So it's always getting smaller. Remember all the principles of composition. The other thing that happens is generally when you go to make a crop, right, you'll get the rule of thirds lines that show up. So it's really easy to make the crop and follow the rule of thirds. No surprise. Okay, so you get this instead. A couple more examples here. Again, these are all in Photoshop and all following rule of thirds. There's the grid. We place the lady on the rule of thirds, right? Place the line at the back side of the walkway at the rule of thirds. You get the idea. Right? Same thing here. This is a square image, but the concept is very much the same. Rule of thirds still applies. The girl falls in the rule of thirds. We've got 1/3 empty, a third dog, and a third girl. Right? And so that helps. The eye level is at that upper third. So even though it's a square instead of a rectangle, we're still using the same principles of composition. Right? And I included this image because this just looks fantastic. I'd love to work there. Sounds great. Right? But again, rule of thirds. Right? The person is right on that rule of thirds. So the other thing that can happen is you can incorrectly expose your file. And you might need to go in and adjust that exposure afterward. This is much easier if you shot with a raw image. If you didn't shoot with a raw image, you might not be able to get as much out of it. Generally, it's used to lighten darker images, and that's fairly successful. If you try to darken light images, it tends to not turn out as well. So it's always better to go a little bit darker than a little bit lighter if you have the choice when you're shooting. But again, better for raw images. Remember that when I did it last class, you could see that example. So here we go, a dark image, right? We adjust the exposure and we get the correct exposure, right? And so it's just a simple adjustment there, assuming we shot in RAW to begin with. So then we have brightness and contrast. And this is an overall adjustment in the brightness of the image, right? Or it's an overall adjustment to where darks are and where lights are, where black is and where white is. Now, brightness and contrast tend to be very heavy-handed. It's hard to do subtle brightness and contrast adjustments. So when we get into the actual manipulation of photos in a little bit, I'm going to show you some better, more fine-tuning ways of dealing with this rather than using brightness or contrast. But it's important to at least point them out that they exist, right? So we might have an image like this that's just kind of muddy, and we might be able to convert it into something like this, right? Brighter, a little bit more contrast between white and black, right? Certainly makes the texture come out a little bit more. Color and saturation. This would be if you had an image that didn't have the correct white balance. It was too blue or too orange or something like that. You can go in and shift the hue of the image to be a little bit more in one direction or the other. It's a little bit hard to do because you have to be able to shift that hue just to the right amount, but it is doable, and we can show you how to do that as well. You might also want to switch from a color image into a black and white image, or a sepia tone image is essentially a black and white image, except it's brown and white instead of black and white. Yeah, it mimics old photography strategies for how do you expose a particular image. Now, one of the things that's very important about a black and white image is it is not worth your time to shoot the image in black and white, right? When we get to converting an image to black and white a little bit later in the live demonstration, I'm going to show you that shooting in color is far more advantageous in terms of the flexibility of creating the black and white image, right? You can mimic a lot of different filters or what have you that might have gone on your camera and get much, much better result. Okay, so you want to do it after the fact. So shoot in color, then convert to black and white. And I'm going to show you how to do that in a little bit. Right? Focus allows you to selectively sharpen parts of the image. Now, one of the misconceptions about sharpening or doing an unsharp mask, for example, is that it's not going to correct a blurry photo. Right? If I were taking a picture and the light settings were low and my daughter decided to move while I was taking the photo, and it was a good picture, but she was blurry, I can't go back and make it unblurry. Okay? This is for very small level detail. It's to punch out little detail. So I have an example here. You might not even be able to tell the difference, but if you look really carefully at the edge here of this image, right, you can see the individual pages, but they're not quite as clear. And if we look over here at the post-processing, the edges of the pages have just a little bit more contrast on them, and they're a little bit sharper. Right? So I didn't do any major adjustments. It just makes this have a little bit more texture. Can you guys see that at all? Right? I know what I'm looking for, so I can see it, but hopefully you can see it a little bit too. So it's a very small, minor adjustment that's happening. It's not a major adjustment. So the other thing, how many people have taken a shot and had red eye on their subject? Right? Very, very common. Anybody know why this happens? Okay, let's get into the technical, because if you understand why it happens, it's a whole lot easier to avoid it. Okay? So what happens is we're in a room, let's say this room, and we're looking around, and naturally our eyes, the pupils of our eyes dilate to allow more light in so that we can see. Okay? So it's very, very common for our pupils to be big. I decide to take a picture of you guys, right? As soon as I take a picture and my camera flashes, right, your pupils are large and the light goes into your eye, reflects off the back of your eye, right, and bounces back out. And when it bounces back out, we get that little red shadowing through the pupils. Okay? Essentially what you're seeing right there. Okay? So how many people have been to a wedding and they've noticed that the wedding photographer that's running around has the camera and then they have the flash like mounted up over here, like on a big pole? You guys have seen this before? Right? The reason that they do this is because if you separate the flash from the lens, right, the flash happens over here, it shines into somebody's eyes, and it shines back out again. It's not in line with the camera, so we don't get the reflection. Okay? If we look at our phones, right, we have the camera and we have the flash. They're about this close together, right? So guess what? If I were to take a picture with this, right, and the flash goes out, it's almost exactly coming back, right? So camera makers did get smart, and they developed a red eye reduction mode, right, where the camera flashes first and then takes the picture. Okay, what that is trying to do is it's trying to make you, who's in the dark room, whose eyes are all wide open, letting the light in, dilate your eyes first and then take the picture. Okay, so when your eyes get smaller, they constrict because of the first flash, and then you take a subsequent picture, less light goes in and bounces back. It makes the red eye less, right? That's why it's red eye reduction, not red eye removal. Okay? So anyway, we can do all of this after the fact in Photoshop. We can just change those pixels, make them dark. You don't even see them. Okay? Piece of cake after the fact. So then we'll move into more of the advanced techniques. And this is something that we will spend a lot of time talking about today. And that is a levels adjustment. And I'm going to bounce forward and show you what the final images are. And then I'll come back and explain what this graph means and what it does. Okay, so we take an image that looks like this. Okay, this was the original image. And we're going to post-process it using a levels adjustment into this. You guys would agree that the texture of this image really stands out a lot more, right, than this one. So this image, it's not a bad image, right? But if we were to look very carefully and I were to say, tell me what is white on this image, right? Well, you might say that maybe this is kind of white, right? Or maybe this dot is kind of white, okay? But if we looked at it really carefully, it's not really white. It's kind of a light gray. Okay, it's not white, white. If I were to also say, tell me what is black on this image, you'd say, okay, well, maybe, you know, like the shadow in there is kind of black. Okay? But it's not black, black. It's just kind of dark gray. So if we look at the spectrum of this image, we have kind of light gray to dark gray. We don't have a true pure white, and we don't have a true pure black. So the image that's next to it that has a levels adjustment has pure white. And so if we thought the white was here, because that's the lightest part of the image, or maybe right there, that is now pure white. It's not light gray, it's white. Okay? Likewise, if black was maybe right in here, right, over there it was kind of a dark gray, we say that this is actually black now. Okay? So if we go back a slide and we look at the histogram, and this happens to be the histogram of that image. By histogram, I just mean the graph. What this represents in graph form is that if I were to create a chart, right, and I would never make you do this manually. Computers do this great, right? And I were to say we had a color of gray that was 1% gray, right? And I were to look at the image and count up how many grays were actually 1% gray, and I'd get some number of pixels. 2 pixels were 1% gray. Then maybe I'd go to 2% gray, and I'd count up the number of pixels, and maybe I had 10 pixels that were 2% gray. And then I were to go to 3% gray, and I had 20 pixels. You get the idea? Right? So it's the gray value of each one of those pixels is charted. You know, there's 1, 2, you know, etc. When we get to the middle, 50% gray, look at how many pixels we have. Lots and lots of pixels, right? And then we come out as we get closer and closer to black, and we get dark gray, but we have no pixels over in here that are actually black. So we end in kind of this dark gray, maybe 75% gray. So all we're doing in this process is we're telling the computer, this is a long-winded explanation of this, we're telling the computer that no, white isn't here anymore, white is actually right there. Or I guess in this case it's black, sorry I had it backwards, right? Black is right there, and white is not over here anymore, it's actually right back here. Okay? So when you do this live on your own photos, it will make a lot more sense. Okay? But I at least try to walk through it ahead of time. So then we move into something called curves. And curves allow you to selectively adjust the relative lightness or darkness of only certain parts of the image. Okay? It is extraordinarily hard to explain this in any way that makes any sense without you actually doing it. Okay? You just have to experience it. I'll show you an example of what it can do. We have this without the curves adjustment. We have that one with the curves adjustment. Big difference in the two images. Okay? But you kind of have to go through it and do it. So I'll walk through how to do it, and I'll show you that live because it'll make a lot more sense than me trying to explain it here. So then we move on into our final results, or our export phase of things. For the most part, you're going to be publishing to web, right? And in the case of this class, certainly you're going to be making JPEGs to post online, which I will show you how to do today. When you go to print, you're going to save a higher quality version to print. Okay? If you were uploading it to Facebook or whatever, you'd save the high quality and upload it to Facebook and let them deal with the adjustments after the fact. Okay? There's a variety of web galleries that will allow you to do this. Flickr is a big one. They actually give you a terabyte of free storage, which is nice. It makes it a good place to store your images, though for whatever reason people seem to like Facebook better or Instagram better. And so that's kind of the end output in a typical workflow. Okay? So what we're going to do, as a way of preserving my voice slightly, we're going to take a 10-minute break right now. At 6:47, we'll come back. I don't know, 13 minutes. We'll come back at 7 o'clock. I'm going to go make some tea so that I can actually survive this. And then we're going to sit down and go for probably another 30 or 40 minutes. And I'm going to show you step-by-step walking through. In the meantime, if you can go ahead and download 3 of your favorite images that you shot between last class and today, we're going to be working with 3 images. So pick your 3 favorites, and if you can have those ready to go, you'll be able to do what I'm doing live with me. Okay? Okay, so we're going to get back started. Hopefully the throat coat tea will make me withstand the rest today. So a couple things as we get back started. I've gone ahead and I've plugged in my flash drive, which has my images on it that I'm going to use as examples today. But if I want the Dropbox to be running and actually syncing my files, this is just a reminder that I have to actually start the application. So I'll go to my portable applications folder and start my Dropbox portable application. And once that gets started, it'll end up down here in my tray, assuming that I double-clicked on it. Yes, I did. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open up Photoshop. And one of the the things that people sometimes do once they have Photoshop files is they'll double click on the Photoshop file, which makes a lot of sense. Unfortunately, sometimes in the lab, there's a crossing of what application should open what program. And Photoshop, for whatever reason, for a long time has opened CS3 instead of CS6. And we want to be making sure we're actually using CS6. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the Start menu. Generally, Photoshop's listed in the list here. But I can also go to All Programs, Adobe Design Standard CS6. And then I can go ahead and open Adobe Photoshop CS6. And that will go ahead and open up Photoshop. Now, for whatever reason, my instructor machine likes to make Photoshop kind of light colored. Yours will be dark colored. It makes no difference. It's just like the defaults here. So before we get started too heavily in Photoshop, I want to point out kind of the Photoshop interface and what's available to us so that you can be familiar. If I were to predict the number of people, hold on one second. If I were to predict the number of people that were familiar with Photoshop, generally that number is higher than the other Adobe products. For whatever reason, Photoshop seems to be the easiest to get started with. So a lot of you may already be familiar with it. But even if you are, I want to go through the options. Yeah. Oh, okay. So hold on one second while I sign that one in. What's it say? That is interesting. You know what? Restart. Try it again. It's probably a floating license and it's not picking up the floating license. If this doesn't work, restart the machine. Yeah, it's not working. So just restart the machine. Let's see if we can get it to go. Here's the thing. Restart the whole machine again. So they worked this morning, so I would assume that they would work tonight. All right. So let's talk through the basic kind of Photoshop interface. Very, very similar with the other Adobe products, though. So once you start getting used to the way Adobe lays things out, you'll be pretty comfortable as you move forward. So at the top here, we have a typical menu structure, much like any of the other applications that you're used to working in, like Word or what have you. So it's essentially the same here. Some of the commands that we're going to be using today will come from these menus as well. So we'll go through those as necessary. Directly below the general file menu, we have a ribbon that gives us options about whatever tool we have active. And so if I were, for example, to click on the Move tool, I'd get information about the Move, right? What other options do I have relating to Move? If I were to pick on the Crop tool, I'd have options relating to the Crop tool. So this ribbon is always going to change based on whatever the current tool that's selected. Okay? So you always want to check that ribbon to see what options are available as a result of your choice of tool. On the left side here, running down, we have a variety of tools that are available to us. These are the standard tools. Do note that underneath a lot of these tools, if we were to click and hold, there are other options. So for example, if I was to click and hold on the rectangular marquee tool, I'd be able to select an elliptical marquee tool or a single row or single column marquee tool. Likewise, if I were to click on the polygonal lasso, I'd get the regular lasso or the magnetic lasso. So very frequently in the toolbar structure, there are other options available underneath the primary tool. Today we're going to be working with the dodge and burn tools. Again, if you're looking for one of those, they might not be available. Click and hold on either the dodge or the burn, and you can switch between the two. Okay? And I'll point those out as we go forward so you don't have to memorize what they are just yet. Okay? On the right side, we have a couple things. One, up at the top, there's something that says Essentials in all likelihood by default. The Essentials is what we're going to be working in today, but notice that we can switch the general availability of certain menus and certain tools. It's basically the workspace of Photoshop into a specific mode. So if I went to photography, for example, certain things would change, right? Certain tools would change, and certain things that are available on the right side here would change. Okay? Generally speaking, working in photography mode is not a bad idea, though I'm going to show you how to work in just the default setup so you don't have to change it if you can't find the changes. So we're going to go back to Essentials. All right. So the biggest thing is the layers window that's available over here. Right now I have nothing open, so I see no layers. As we go forward and we start to do this post-processing on images, we will look and see what layers we're creating, and we'll be able to turn certain adjustments on and off because there'll be layers. So I'll come back to that, but it's important to point out that it exists. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open my 3 image files, and I'm going to go to File and then Open, and I'm going to go to my flash drive here, and I'm going to open up 3 image files. So I'll open the first one and then select Open. There's the first image. I'll go to File and I'll go to Open, and I'll select the second image. And I'll go to File and then Open, and I'll select the third image. Okay? And I tried to pick a variety of images just so that you guys can see what works and what doesn't. One of the important things to recognize when we're doing post-processing is that not all of the various techniques will work on every single image. So like, for example, when we do the levels adjustment, it's not necessarily going to work on every image. But it's important to recognize that it works on some images and not on others. Okay? So that's part of why I picked 3 very different images so that we can kind of see what works and what doesn't. As we go forward in part 1, I'm going to do each step on each of the 3 images. So you'll see me repeat the same step 3 times as a way of reinforcing exactly what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. Okay? And you'll also be able to see differences in the results. So we're going to start first with the crop tool. It's not actually listed on your handout for today, but a lot of times people need to do crops initially, so it's better to go ahead and start with the crop. The crop tool is about the 5th tool down on the left side here. It looks like 2 kind of intersecting rectangles with a line through them. And if I pick on the crop tool, we're going to look at the ribbon at the top here and look at the options. So in this first drop-down menu, I have the ability to pick original ratio or unconstrained, or I can pick a specific ratio. So if I knew, for example, that I was going to want a square output, I'd pick the square constraint. Okay? Now for right now, I'm going to stick with the original ratio. Okay? Likewise, if I come over here, I have some options that I can type in values. It doesn't matter. But if I go to where it says View, I can see rule of thirds is checked. Okay? So that's the compositional technique that I was planning on using, so that if I went to crop this image, we would see, right, that I get the rule of thirds to show up. Okay? I'm going to leave this image uncropped for right now because this roughly falls on the rule of thirds and this hill comes down right there. So we'll leave that one. I am, however, going to move to my next image right here, and I am going to use the crop tool on this. So once again, I have the crop tool selected, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag one of these corners, right, kind of down, because I want this image to show up a little bit more like this in its final format, right, so that the focal point is falling roughly on the rule of thirds. Okay, so I've gone ahead and I've cropped this image. When I'm done with the cropping, I'm going to click this little check mark up here in the top ribbon. If I don't like my cropping, I can click the circle and make it go away. Right? But if I do like it, I'll click the check mark, and once I do that, the crop sticks, and I can move on. Okay? I'm going to go to my last image right here, and again, I'll work with the crop tool, and I'm going to start in one of the corners, and I'll work to adjust this slightly. What I'd like is I'd like that house to fall roughly there, and we'll move this down a little bit. You know, so maybe it's about like that. Okay? So I've adjusted the cropping just a little bit, and then I'll go ahead and check mark. Okay? So I have the cropping adjusted on both of those images, and I elected not to do cropping on the first image. So this is one of the things that's important. If you already feel like you have a good composition, there's no need to adjust it, but if you need to adjust it, that's how you would go about doing it. Okay? There are also no rules. My image doesn't have to stay a rectangle. It could be a square. It could be some other aspect ratio. It could be unconstrained such that I crop it the way that I want. If, for example, I wanted to crop this as a square, you'll see that my cropping now becomes a square. And I can choose where it's going to fall in the square. Right? Just like the picture of the girl with the dog. when I did the cropping, I could do it that way. I don't want this, so I'm going to click the little no sign so that that cropping goes away. And then I can move on to another tool. OK, so I've done cropping. And we're going to move into the Photoshop 1.1 tutorial. And so if I went to the digital tools site and I went to tutorials and then Photoshop 1.1 black and white, we're going to walk through how to convert an image into black and white. Now the good news is for you guys, I'm going to make this big for a second here. On all these tutorials, certainly in the beginning in Photoshop, I have little mini video demonstrations of each one that will walk you through step by step and talk you through step by step. So if whatever happens tonight, if you miss a little bit of it, you can go back and watch it. They're pretty quick, but it'll walk you through the same steps. Below the video is also a written out step by step with some images that will help you decide, right, what options might be the right mode for you. Okay, and it'll explain them. So I'm going to go ahead and do this live so you can see what happens. And like I said, I'm going to do it 3 times so you see me do it on different images. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to the Layer menu, which is available up here at the top, and I'm going to select New Adjustment Layer. And so I could, instead of going to New Adjustment Layer, I could go to Image and then Adjustments. But when I make an adjustment here under the Image menu, it's a permanent change to the image. Okay? If I do it as an adjustment layer, I go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, right? And I'm going to pick Channel Mixer. That's the one I'm looking for. When that happens, it's going to present a new layer dialog box where I can actually type in what I want the layer name to be. So since this is going to be black and white, I'm going to call it black and white. Got it. And I'll go ahead and say OK. Now once it creates the new layer, I can look over here on the right side under my Layers menu, and I have a layer called Background, which is my original image. And then on top of it, I have another layer called Black and White. And what Photoshop does, and actually what all of the Adobe products do, is they stack up layers as if they were individual sheets of paper. So the first piece of paper was my picture, and it puts it down. Right? Then it takes a piece of tracing paper, essentially, and it makes that the next layer, and it puts it right over the top. So the stack of layers here controls the order with which these pieces of paper are stacking up. Okay? So the fact that the black and white layer is on top of the background is a good thing. Okay? So as I continue along here, I also get something called properties that's available. And this is the channel mixer properties, and this is going to change based on which adjustment layer we're choosing to work with at a given time. So the channel mixer properties are open. I'm going to check this box right here for monochrome. And what this does is it converts the image from color into black and white. And so we can see that the change, it's probably hard for you guys to see on the screen, but it will actually convert from being in color to being in black and white. Okay? Now, this is just kind of the default black and white option. And as I told you, instead of shooting in black and white mode on your camera, right, doing this in Photoshop gives us a lot more flexibility. So I'm going to look here under the Preset menu. And if I click on the Preset menu, I have the ability to pick from 6 different presets. Okay? I can create my own and save my own, etc. But for the most part, one of these presets will be pretty good. So let me start with the black and white infrared. So you see that my image changes when I switch to that mode. The sky becomes very light, and the ground becomes a little bit lighter. If I switch to the next one with the blue filter, right, the sky becomes even lighter, and the ground becomes a little bit different, a little bit darker shadows. So let me continue on, and we'll go to the green filter. Okay, now the sky looks a little bit better. The ground is washed out a little bit. We go to the orange filter. Okay, the sky looks a lot better there. And then we go to the red filter. Okay, even better. The ground here isn't changing much, but the sky is definitely better. Right? And then we can go to the last one, the yellow filter. Yeah, I don't like that one as much. So for my eye, the red filter is about the right mix. Okay? Big difference in how I changed it. And notice that I'm just running through those presets. So it didn't involve much work on my part, but I can get a much better black and white image out of it. Okay? If I wanted to change values, for example, right, I could change these sliders here. The only key is that you want the total to equal 100%. And essentially when I go through the presets, if I went to the green filter, for example, it changes the value, but the total is 100%. Let's go to the orange filter, right? Plus 50% red, plus 50% green, 0% blue, right? And I end up with plus 100%. Okay, so we just want to make sure that that equals 100% if you customize it. Chances are one of the presets will be just fine. So when I'm done, I don't actually have to click OK or do anything. But I would like to point out that this is not a permanent change to your image. Okay? I can turn on and turn off the layer by clicking on this little eye that's next to the adjustment layer. And I can have the image go back to black and white, or excuse me, back to color. Or I can have it go into black and white. So it's not a permanent change. It's something that I can change. Okay? So we're going to go ahead and leave that one in its place for right now. And I'm going to move on and do the same thing on this next image. Okay? This one will probably see a little bit more change. So let me go ahead and go up to Layer, New Adjustment Layer. And again, this is going to be Channel Mixer. And we'll call this black and white. I'll go ahead and say OK. And I have my black and white layer. I'm going to check the box for monochrome. And as soon as I do that, my image is going to turn into a black and white image. Okay? Now I'm going to run through all of my presets, starting with the infrared. I'm going to say, ooh, that doesn't look very good. I don't want that one. We go to the blue filter. Not very good. Continue on. Okay, that's a little better. Right? Go to the orange. I kind of like that one. Okay. We can go to the red filter. Probably too light. Right? We can go to the yellow filter. Actually, the yellow filter is pretty good. Okay? So I don't know which one I'm going to pick necessarily. I'm not a professional photographer. What these filters are doing is it's mimicking screwing an actual physical filter onto your camera before you shoot in black and white. Right? Much easier to do this after the fact, though. So it turns out I kind of like this yellow filter, so we're going to leave it at that. Remember that I can turn on and turn off the black and white by just clicking on and off the layer. Okay? So we can go from the color mode to the black and white mode. Okay? Let me jump to the last one. Okay, this is more of the landscape scene, and I want to adjust this as well. We go up to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and again I'm going to go to Channel Mixer, and we'll call this black and white. I'll say OK, and I'll run through my presets again. So we'll start with the infrared. Okay, not too bad. We'll go to the blue. Yeah, I lose all the sky. I don't like that. Okay, I'll go to the green filter. Much more sky. It's not too bad. We go to the orange filter. A little bit better sky. Red filter. I kind of like that one. Right? For you guys, it might be a little dark on the screen, but on my screen, it's pretty good. Right? And we'll go to the yellow filter. I don't like it as much. So I'm going to stick with the red filter on this one. Right? Kind of punches out the sky rather nicely. So again, I have the ability to turn on and turn off the black and white. Right? Just by turning on and turning off that layer. So I just finished the first part of exercise 104, which was Photoshop 1.1 converting to black and white. So now I'm going to jump back to the first image here, right? And I'm actually going to turn off black and white for right now. And I'm going to do the next one, which is Photoshop 1.2 adjusting levels. So once again, on the Digital Tools site here, I have under Photoshop 1.2 levels, I have the same thing set up. So you can actually do the little video, and it'll walk you through the various options that are available. Okay? So let me go ahead and jump over into Photoshop, and we'll go through them live. Okay? So notice that I didn't have to do anything special. I just turned off the layer, and I can now apply another layer. So let me go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and this time we're going to pick Levels. Right? And when I do levels, it's going to name the layer Levels 1. That's fine. I'm doing a levels adjustment. It makes sense for it to stay named Levels. And then I'll go ahead and say OK. And when I do that, I get my histogram, which remember is the distribution of gray values of individual pixels. So I'm going to look here, and I'm going to see that really black doesn't start for until about that point right there. Okay? White, however, yeah, there's some actual white pixels, probably right here where the sun is. Okay? So if I were doing a levels adjustment here, I would drag this black side over to right about there, right where the graph starts to go up. And so you can see what a big difference it makes from here to pulling that to right there. Really deepens up the shadows a lot. Okay? Big enhancement to the image. So once I'm done, I'll go ahead and let go, and we'll move on and do this on another picture. So here I am again. And again, I'm turning off the black and white. I should point out that these can be turned on and off independent. So I have the levels. I can turn it on and turn it off. I have the black and white, and I can turn it on and turn it off. Okay? I can choose to have the levels on or off on the black and white version. Okay? So I have a lot of flexibility. Anything can be on or off. So we'll leave the levels on here, and we'll go back to this piece. And once again, I'll go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Levels. And we'll call it Levels 1. That's fine. And if I look at this particular image, right, black, so notice the histograms are completely different. Right? Black is starting almost exactly where black starts. So that's pretty good. Right? It means that this piece is actually kind of pure black. Okay? If we look over here at white, it's almost all the way to white. So really, this just involves a little bit of pulling back. And probably this kind of adjustment is very subtle. So you can see right here, it doesn't change a whole lot. Okay? So there's kind of a subtle adjustment to that. So the levels on this photo made a dramatic difference. Right? The levels on this next photo made a much smaller difference. Right? Just a little bit. So depending on your individual image, it's going to make more or less difference. Okay? So we'll do it yet again on this last picture right here, and I'll turn off the black and white again. And I'll go up to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Levels. All right? And we'll look at this picture. So on this picture, I have white, so I'm really not going to do any adjustment with white. The black maybe could come over a little bit. So again, not that much of adjustment, something like that. But I want to point out one other thing, and that is that we have a mid-tone slider, kind of a mid-gray value. You can also play with this to selectively lighten or darken the overall image. And sometimes, but not always, there it is in neutral position, sometimes it's worth it just to slide it just a whisker to one side or the other. So I've slid this just a little bit. It darkens up the image just a little bit. Okay? So it's worth pointing that out. I could play around with it with this image as well, or I could shift where that dark point is. The truth is that it's pretty good right at its default. Okay? So I've now done a levels adjustment to all three of the images, okay, which was Photoshop 1.2. All right, so we're going to move on to Photoshop 1.3, and this is curves. So once again, on the website, there is a Photoshop 1.3 for curves, and this will help explain exactly what we're doing. Okay, so if you get a little bit lost, there's an explanation right here. Okay, so we'll start with that first photo again. And this time I'm going to go up to Layer, New Adjustment Layer. You're getting the repetition of this, certainly. Okay? And we're going to go to Curves. And I'll go ahead and say, okay, Curves 1 is just fine. So now, when we look at the window here, right, we still have kind of a light histogram in the background that matches up with the histogram that we created in the levels adjustment. Okay? So there it is. But we also get this diagonal line that goes from black to white up here at the corner. Okay? And what this line does is we can adjust the curve of this line and lighten or darken the image. And so I'll start with kind of the easy large-scale adjustment. If I were to click and hold and drag this line from the center, right, I could kind of lighten the image. If we look down at the bottom in the grass, it looks pretty good. Okay? But the sky's getting really white. Okay? If I did the opposite, I could get the sky to look pretty good, but not the ground is starting to get too dark. Okay? So let me put that right back in the center. Okay? And notice that it leaves a little point right there in the center. Now let me grab at kind of 3/4 of the way up here. And if I drag just this portion, notice that it changes the sky, but it doesn't really change the ground much. Okay? So I can selectively tweak the sky maybe to right there, something like that. And I can also control the ground down here independently. So this is probably a little bit more dramatic. Notice the sky is not changing, right? But I can control what's happening to just the ground. Right? So maybe I make the ground a little bit lighter like that. Okay? So I'm selectively controlling parts of the image. Now I can add more and more points to adjust even more individual little levels. Okay? And the truth is that as I keep adding to this, right, I can get to a point where I just have too many points. Okay? Well, the good news about doing this on adjustment layer is we can just turn off curves altogether, the curves 1 adjustment, and I can go back up to my layer, new adjustment layer, and I can do another curves adjustment. We'll call it curves 2, and I can start again. Right? So one of the things that I'm going to encourage you to do with curves is to actually really play around with this. Okay? Now I can take this even a step further. Let me set the point in the middle here. And if I were to drag this really far, you can see that I can almost make this kind of surreal. Right? We could be on the alien planet right now or whatever. Right? This is probably pushing it beyond what I really wanted to do, but I want to point that out, that we can really dramatically change what's happening in a particular image by adjusting this curve structure. Right? So let me go back and do just kind of a reasonable small adjustment. I'm going to tweak the sky just a little bit. I'm going to tweak the ground just a little bit. Right? And now I have a pretty good adjustment. Okay? It's there. It made a little bit of a difference. Okay? It's not nearly as big of a difference as the levels adjustment. So there's a big difference, and then the curves is a little bit on top. Okay? Let's move on and look at this image and look at the curves for this image. Let me go to Image, Adjustments, or excuse me, Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Curves. This is curves 1. So same thing here, right? I'll set the point in the center, and then I'll work with the lighter parts of the image and the darker parts of the image. So let me go ahead and look here, and I'll tweak that just a little bit, like that. And this section, I'm going to pull that down just a little bit. So I'm kind of enhancing the yellow. And this is what's called a typical S curve. So it's very subtle. Looks like kind of a sideways F. But it generally does a pretty good job at adjusting the image itself. So there it was before, and there it is after. I just boosted the colors and the saturation just a little bit. Okay? And again, it's to your eye. On the screen, it looks better than it does on the projector. Okay? And that's the nature of trying to project this stuff. So let me jump one more. And once again, we'll go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and we'll go to Curves. And I'll do it for this image. All right, so we'll set a point in the center. Sorry. And I'll adjust this and kind of tweak the sky a little bit. And I'll pull this down and tweak the ground just a little bit. And I'll end up with an image that I'm pretty happy with. Okay? If I didn't like it, remember I can adjust the ground, make that a little bit lighter. I can make the sky a little bit darker. So I have some flexibility. That's kind of an inverse S curve. You have to see which one really looks right for you. To me, I want this to be a little bit darker, so we're going to leave that more in that realm. Okay? So it's very much by eye as to what the final results are. Okay? Again, completely independent of the levels. I can turn just the curves on, I can turn just the levels on, or I can turn them both on, or I can turn all three on and have it in black and white. Okay? So a lot of flexibility there. Okay, so we're going to move back to the first image, and we're going to do Photoshop 1.4, which is adding a little bit of pop to the image. This is, again, a little bit more subtle control. What this will do is we'll add a little bit more saturation to the color of the image. So I'm going to go up to my Layer menu, and I'll go to New Adjustment Layer, and I'm going to choose Channel Mixer again. This is the same one that we did with the black and white, but we're going to do it differently. So this time I'm going to call it Pop, and I'll say OK. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at each output channel. So this output channel is red. And when I look at the percentage values, right, I have 100%, 0, and 0. I'm going to bump the red value up to, say, 116, which if we look at, if let's say push it a little bit further, right, see how it tints the whole image kind of pink? Okay? I need to be able to compensate for that. Right? So I'll exaggerate for right now for you guys to see it a little bit more. By subtracting. Remember I said that this percentage had to equal 100%, or it should. So I'll say 100% there, and I'll say minus 25 in green and minus 25 in blue. So what that has done is it's boosted the red values of the scene. It's saturated the red values. I'll then switch my output channel to green, and I'll do the same thing. I'll boost the green values. And in reality, you're going to want to do about 116% to 120%. What I'm doing is too much, but it's going to show better on the screen. So 150, and then I'll do minus 25 and minus 25. You'll be doing 116, 118, something like that, and minus 8, minus 8. Okay? And so I've done it here. And then we'll move to the blue value, and we'll go 150 and then minus 25. Oops. And minus 25. Okay, so once that's done, we'll be able to take a look at what the original image was, and then I can turn it on. And because I exaggerated it, you guys can actually see it on the screen. On my screen, it's way too much. It's way too much color. It's an oversaturated image. Okay, but you guys will be able to see it a little bit more in a little more detail on your own individual screens. But it's basically boosting the colors, right, making the image have a little bit more color in it. So that's called pop. I'm going to continue and do it on the rest of these as well as practice. So again, I'll go up to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and I'm going to do a channel mixer, and I'll call this Pop. Say OK. There it is. And so this time I'm going to work my way through the channels. We'll start with red, and this will definitely overprocess it. If I do the 150, it'll be very, very red. So I'm going to tone that down. I'll do 120. And minus 10, minus 10. I'll move to the green channel. And so this is going to be minus 10, 120, and minus 10. And I'll move to the blue channel, minus 10, minus 10, 120. Okay? And again, even with that value, to me the colors become just too much. Okay? So I probably need to tone that back, but I'm trying to show you what it does. Okay? In reality, this needs to be much less. All right, so we'll do the last one. Here it is. We'll go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and we'll go to Channel Mixer. And again, this is going to be called Pop. Say OK. And we'll go back through. And so we'll start with the red channel. We'll do maybe 116 this time, minus 8 and minus 8. I'll go to the green channel. This will be minus 8, 116, minus 8. We'll go to the blue channel. Minus 8, and 116. There we go. And now that one's done. So this one on the screen, you probably won't be able to discern at all. It's very subtle. On my screen, it makes a little bit more of a difference. Okay? All right, so we made it through 1-1, 1-2, 1-3, and 1-4. Now we're going to do one more thing, and that is using the dodge and burn tools. Okay? And the dodging and burning tools allow us to, it's kind of like an old school adding chemicals when we were developing. We're going to be able to selectively lighten or darken parts of the image. We're going to do this a little bit differently. Okay, so you may need to refer to the actual tutorial under Photoshop 1.5, Dodge and Burn, to make sure you get these steps right. So I'm going to go back to Photoshop here. We'll start with the first image. And I'm going to go up to Layer, and instead of going to New Adjustment Layer this time, I'm going to go to Layer, New Layer. So it's just a standard layer. Okay, and I'll rename the layer Dodge and Burn. And I'm going to do a couple things to the new layer. First, I'm going to change the mode of the layer to be Overlay, right here. And then I'm going to check a box right below it for Fill with an Overlay Neutral 50% Gray. Right? And then I'll go ahead and say OK. And you'll see that the layer over here looks very different than any of the layers that I've done before. It's kind of a gray box instead. Okay? With that layer selected, so it's kind of highlighted in light blue, I'm going to come over to my tools, and I'm going to pick the Burn tool, which is kind of a hand that looks like this. Okay? If you don't see it, you might see the Dodge tool, which is a circle with kind of a line coming out of it. Okay? So I'm going to go with the Burn tool, the hand. And now I have the ability to adjust up here the brush. And so the size of the brush is a slider. I can have a small little brush, and it'll show up as a small circle. Or I can have a larger brush, and it'll show up as a large circle. In reality, I'm going to want a fairly large brush. Maybe that's a little too large. Something like that. Well, maybe a little more. Yeah, that'll work. Okay. Then I have the ability to adjust what's called hardness of the brush. And this is essentially like saying I have a very diluted watercolor brush, and if I put that on the page, the very center will be the color, and then everything kind of dissipates from there, or I have like a stamp where I put red on it and exactly what the stamp shows will be exactly what comes out on the end product. It's all the same color. So a very hard brush is going to be like the stamp, and whatever I do is going to come out as a circle. So in this particular example, I'm going to darken. I'm using this as an example. Very hard edge to it. If I back up to here, and instead of the hard brush, I do the soft brush, and I do the same thing. Right? It's going to start in the center and be diffuse as it goes out. Does that kind of make sense? So in reality, go back here. I'm going to want a very soft brush for what I'm doing. So the size is up here at about 1,000 pixels, and the hardness is at 0%. And then what I'm going to do, oops, I went one step too far. My bad. There we go. Is I'm going to selectively darken up the corners of the image here a little bit, kind of tweak the sky, make that come out a little bit better. Okay? And again, we can turn on and turn off what I just did. You can see that I darkened up the sky. Maybe I went a little too far, but you get the idea. Okay? Now I can do the inverse by, instead of selecting the burn tool, I can select the dodge tool. And the dodge is going to selectively lighten. So I could lighten, say, in here, and make that part of the hill a little bit lighter. Something like that. Okay? So now we can look at the dodge and the burn, and you can see that I really changed what the image looks like. And maybe I went a little far with it, but at least you can see the potential of it. So let me come back to the next one here, and we'll repeat this. It's this image. I have to turn off the pop. It's just too saturated for me. And let me go ahead and go to Layer, New Layer. And again, this is going to be the dodge and burn. And I'm going to go to Mode, Overlay, Fill with 50% gray. I'll say OK. And then I'll again go back to the dodging and burning tools. So let me start with the burn. And in the burn, I think I'm going to make the brush a little small. There is a key shortcut to change the size of the brush. It's the bracket keys. One bracket makes it smaller, one bracket makes it bigger. We'll cover that more in a little bit of detail here. And I'm going to darken up this edge of the pastry a little bit. Maybe a little bit in there, maybe a little bit in there. Something like that. Just a little bit. Okay? Then I'm going to go to the the dodge tool, and we'll make my thing a little bit bigger. And I'm going to really lighten up the background here because I don't want it to be quite so prominent. I want it to go away. Lighten up the background, maybe a little bit more there. Lighten up this part of the foreground, like that, to try to accentuate the actual pastry itself. Okay? And so if I were to turn that on and turn it off, you can see that I have really changed what this image looks like. Okay? So we'll do it one more time with this last one. It's under Layer, New Layer, Dodge and Burn. Mode is set to Overlay, Fill with 50% gray. And I'm going to then work with the Burn tool first. And I'm going to really darken up down over in here. I don't really like what I'm seeing as that part of the image, so darkening it up isn't going to lose a whole lot. So we'll darken right in there a little bit more. Right? Maybe I'll darken a little bit up here in the sky, just a whisker on the corners. A little bit more right there. Right? And then I can come back to the Dodge tool. And here, maybe I'll highlight this sun just a little bit right in there. Make the sun a little bit brighter, and make the sun a little bit brighter there, and make the sun a little bit brighter right in there. So I just increase that a little bit, and you can then see what I did to change that image. Okay? So it's, again, can be a little bit of a dramatic change to your overall image. Okay, so now I've gone through with all three of my images. You may have gotten through one image, and I want to talk about how do you actually get these images out. Okay, so I'm going to use the food image as an example. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to save the Photoshop file itself, which is a .psd file. So I'll go to File and then Save, I'm going to save this on my flash drive. Let me create a new folder for today's class. This is 2016, and it's the evening section. And I'm going to save it as the name.psd. And what this does is it preserves, I'll just say OK to this format option, it preserves all of my layers, including the original. So I can go back after the fact and turn on or turn off any one of my layers. Right? So this is the fully editable version, the non-destructive version. From here, I'm actually going to create some JPEG destructive versions that I'm going to post online. So I'm going to go ahead and turn everything off except the original image. And I'll go to File. And I'm not going to do Save As, which is what everybody's default is. I'm actually going to do this other option, Save for Web. And Save for Web will allow us to save just a web-only version of this file. I want to make sure that it's set for JPEG. Yours by default will probably be GIF, which we don't want. We want it to be JPEG. And the preset is JPEG High. The other thing is, because this is just being put on the website, we don't need particularly high quality versions of this. We're going to drop the file size down. It will make the uploads much, much easier later on in the class. So I'm going to change whatever the higher number is here, or excuse me, whatever the lower number is, to 600. So I'll do the height in this case to be 600. The width will be 896. It automatically adjusts. And I'll go ahead and click on Save. Now when I click on Save, I'm going to navigate to my flash drive. Make sure we get to the flash drive. There it is. I'm going to make sure it's into my Dropbox folder, into today's folder, which was the 2016E. Right? And I'm going to add to the file name an underscore original. That's my original file. I haven't done anything yet. I'll go ahead and click Save. Then I'll go ahead and turn on the black and white. And I'll go to File, Save for Web. The JPEG High is still here. My height is going to be set at 600. And I'll go ahead and click Save again. Okay? This time, I'll add underscore BW for black and white. And I'll go ahead and click Save. You guys get where this is going, right? Okay? Now I'll turn off my black and white and on my levels adjustment. Okay? And I'll go ahead and go to File, Save for Web, 600, JPEG, and we'll go ahead and click Save again. Okay? This one will be underscore levels. And I'll go ahead and click Save. Okay? Now when we go beyond levels, I can choose to turn on both levels and curves, or I can choose to turn on just curves. At this point, I don't really care whether you leave them on or leave them off. It's up to you. But we're going to create one image for each step or for each tutorial. So I'll continue and I'll do one for curves. I'll go to File, Save for Web. I'll click on JPEG High, 600, and I'll click Save. Okay, this one will be curves. Oops. And I'll click Save. Okay. Now, I won't make you sit here and watch me do all of these, but I do want to point out the posting part of this. Okay. So let me go ahead and I'm going to open Firefox because I already have this open with my administrator, and I don't want you guys to have to worry about that. So digital. I'm going to log in as my administrator here. Oh, excuse me, as my student account. No, don't remember my password. All right, so I'm going to go to New and then Post. Okay. Now when I make this post, it's a little bit different. The total number of images you're going to post tonight is 18. Okay, because you're doing 3 different images and 6 versions of each image. So it's 18 images. So thus far in class, we've only done 1 image, and it's the featured image. Okay? What we're posting is a lot more images. So I'm going to change how you're going to post them so that they show up as a little slideshow rather than a bunch of images. Okay? So we're going to do it slightly different. So this is exercise 104. Right? We don't want that. Okay? And once I have that, I'm going to come over here and right below where Publish is. And again, this is written out on the back side of the handout that I gave you. Okay? So if you get a little bit lost, you're not ready to do it yet, no worries, it is written out. I'm going to click on Gallery. as my format type. Okay, and when I click on gallery under, you can see it below publish, there's format. When I click on gallery, I get an option, a little toggle switch that says show a slideshow on the post page. Okay, so I'm going to check that box for show the slideshow. Okay, then I'm going to move to the gallery tab. So thus far we've always worked in the content tab. I'm going to move over here to gallery. And when I do that, I can choose to insert or add images. So we'll go ahead and insert or add images. Now the nice thing is thus far we've always uploaded one file at a time. Well, when we're doing a gallery, we can upload multiple files at once. So let me go ahead to my flash drive into Dropbox. 136. Oops, sorry, wrong class. 135. My mistake. 104. Here we are in the evening section. There's my images. Right? I'm going to click and hold down Control, and I'll select each image, or I can select the first one, hold down Shift, and select the last one. All of them are selected. I'll click Open. When I do that, it's going to start to upload each image, starting with the first one. Now, on your particular, when you go to do this, you'll have 18. Recognize that that could take 5 minutes. It could take 10 minutes to do the actual upload. Right? Chances are it'll be faster than that. I only did 4. It was pretty fast. When that's done, I'll click on the Save All Changes. Okay? Once I've saved all the changes, I can go ahead and close this upload. Okay? Haven't done anything else. And at this point, I'm going to go to my categories, and I'm going to say, yes, this is exercise 104. Right? It's in 135. There we go. And I'll go ahead and click Publish. Not done yet, but I'll go ahead and click Publish at that point. So let it publish. All right, so it's been published. Now I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom. I'm going to go to Featured Image, and I'm going to set a featured image for this. Okay? Now, I've already uploaded the files, so I don't actually have to go back, right, and re-upload it again. I can use this little menu here under Media Library to show me just the pictures that were uploaded to this post. So not all the pictures, just the ones to this post, and it will bring up just my images. And then I can pick on which image I want to be the featured image. So maybe it'll be this one, and I'll click on Set Featured Image. Okay? After I've done that, it'll show up as my featured image. I'll scroll back up, and I'll click Update. There we go. And then let me go ahead and view the post, and you can see what it looks like. So here's the post, right? And you'll see that instead of, right, a bunch of images, it shows up as a nice little slideshow with little arrows, and I can scroll through and see all of the images in one nice, clean format, okay? Which is the whole idea. All right? So that'll be your actual posting for tonight. And again, that's written out on the back side of your handout for today. Are there any questions? No? This exercise obviously has a lot of repetition built into it. The truth is, at this stage, just barely learning Photoshop, the more you do things, the better you'll get at understanding what they do. So that's why there's a lot of repetition. Next class, we'll do something a little bit more complicated. It'll be working with blending modes, and you'll see another set of operations that can enhance pictures. All right?